We're unmuted.
Already not called meeting of the task force to order. Can we go around and introduce ourselves to those who may not know each other?
Sure.
Well, I'll start. I'm Andy Feinstein. I'm one of the co-chairs. I'm a lawyer in private practice in Mystic, Connecticut.
Heather Tartaglia. I am the Chief Program Officer at CREC and here representing the Resc Alliance.
Good morning, Karen Helene, Director at Benhaven School, and today representing CAPSA.
Sally Drew, Sacred Heart University Associate Professor and Director of Special Education Programs and new to the task force, so glad to be here. Welcome.
Good morning, Lisa Hammersley, the Executive Director of the School and State Finance Project. Amy Turner, Assistant Superintendent Wallingford, President of the current case.
Stephanie Wanzer, I'm a special ed teacher for 18 through 22-year-olds at CES. I'm here for CEA. I'm in charge.
Hi, Susan Yankee, and I'm the Chair of the Connecticut State Advisory Council for Special Education.
I'm Jen Lucier, and I'm here for the Connecticut Parent Advocacy Center.
I'm Tara Flaherty. I'm a high school math teacher at Chicago Valley School. I am a parent, a special ed student and CEA secretary.
I'm Fran Rabinowitz. I'm a co-chair with Andy Feinstein, and I'm the executive director for the Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendents. And I need to add that I have a cold. It's not COVID, but it's a cold, and my ears are so plugged. So if you could speak up, it would be really helpful.
And we have three people online.
No.
Yep, Alicia, can you introduce yourself?
Alicia Bowman, Associate Executive Director for the Connecticut Association of Schools. Good morning.
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 Patrice?
I don't think she has.
Yeah, she doesn't have her headset on yet. And Brian, can you introduce yourself?
Good morning, everybody. Brian Klimkowitz, Special Education Division Director from the State Department of Education.
Right on North Main Street.
And are you there yet, Patrice?
I'm here, Patrice McCarthy, Executive Director and General Counsel at CAPE.
Okay, let me start off by saying a couple of things. First, there's this draft report out. I have integrated the comments that people made that were, grammatical wording, things of that sort of clarification. As to the comments of disagreement, I've deleted them to have an easier draft to read, but we're going to go through and we'll have their chance to make comments about that. We're continuing to operate by consensus, and so if there's something that somebody can't live with, I think the general rule is it's going to drop out of the report. So that's those are basically the ground rules on that. The other thing I wanted to mention, which is sort of down on the agenda, look, we have a lot of smaller proposals that are probably quite doable. There are some really major ones that are in there. Universal pre-K, a weight for special education in the ECS formula, changing how special ed is funded generally. And we've really got to decide as a group, and we can talk about this as we go through it, whether we want to propose the big things that we know are going to be years to move forward, or whether we stick to the more doable, the more precise ones. But I think there are those. We do have to keep in mind there are two levels of those sorts of proposals. On the bigger, one of the bigger ones, I don't know whether you saw it, but there was an interview with Chairman Jeff Curry, I think in the Examiner yesterday, where he actually is talking about trying to move through universal pre-K. So, maybe that's not as out of the box as I would have initially thought it might be. So that's all I have to say for you.
Well, I think where I am landing again is to reemphasize the fact that this is not Andy and my task force. We're facilitators, and we want to ensure that every voice is in the room. I do think we need to continue to go through these recommendations, even though it's tedious at times. I personally would love to see some big ticket items go forward, in the form of recommendations, if we all agree with it. I know it said findings, but I can't imagine anyone that's gonna argue with universal preschool. So I do think that that should go forward. I know that the Blue Ribbon Committee has some recommendations on early childcare. I sat on that committee. I think it's $2 billion over the next 10 years. And it isn't just, I just want to say this, it's not just universal preschool. It's, so how are we gonna pay our childcare workers? Because they are, so underpaid. The Blue Ribbon Committee spends a great deal of time on that, so it's complex. We could, but I don't wanna be just with little tiny things. I want to make a few large recommendations, or findings and recommendations as well. But only if you can live with it. If either of those, remember the consensus line? If anything is a 4 or a 5 for anybody, I honestly don't think it should go forward. The task force should come to consensus as long as it takes to make that happen.
We've got more people to introduce here. Jason, can you introduce yourself, please?
Sure, Jason Adler. I'm here on behalf of AFT. I was president of my local union, 2038. I am now treasurer. That can be corrected, but when I was nominated, I was that. I'm also serving as a board member in Clinton, and I'm a parent of students who also had IEPs.
Mr. Grove.
How you doing?
Our famous Mr. Grove with a big picture in the paper recently.
Oh, yes. Mike Grove, Assistant Superintendent in Public Schools, CASBO, Vice President, that's I'm on the task force.
And Catherine.
Hi, Catherine Meyer, attorney at the Center for Children's Advocacy, Director of the Medical Legal Partnership at the Yale Child Study Center. Can I say one thing? Just in agreement with you folks, I think that when we offer these big picture ideas, we're showing the interconnectedness, and I think that makes a statement.
I do, I think we need to, I do think, a few big things, need to be said. And there are lots of small things too that we can find and, but just a few that we can put forward, in our interim report, because some of this stuff is gonna take forever anyway, we know that. And, the earlier we started, the quicker, we might get some attention.
So, Dawn printed out, the, I think, most recent version, which includes Mike Grove's comments from 8:30 this morning and Brian's comments from 7:45 this morning. I think they're integrated in there. I did not have a chance to integrate them. I propose we start by, I'm sorry the pages aren't numbered, but you'll find a page in the middle on the bottom has a Roman numeral 3 and says current issues. And I think that's where we start in this. And the next page starts with the general discussion of funding and then the discussion of excess cost reimbursement.
Yeah, but we did all that already.
I think we were on,
Yeah.
we were on number 5.
Private
Private special education.
Okay,
I
fine.
did, we did, up to number 4 the last time, so we're starting with number 5.
Okay, that's a few pages on. I'm sorry, again, they're not numbered. Brian had comments on this one, right?
I didn't miss on that thought. It's
Are
halfway.
you there, Brian?
Thank you so much.
Hi, folks. Yeah, Andy, can you hear me?
Yep.
There's a recommendation.
Yeah, I apologize. I have a bit of a conflict here coming up at 10 o'clock, so I don't have my laptop open in front, but will for the next few minutes be able to listen in, and then I expect to be able to jump back on around 10:30. So I apologize for that conflict. But could you just refresh or just remind me or read off the section that we're referring to? Was it the prevalence rate?
No, this is approved private special education placements, and this is a recommendation that there be a model contract established.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. Yeah, so my comment here was just in my recollection of the discussions that we had on that specific topic, it seemed as though there wasn't a great need for a model contract now. That would have been something that may have been needed when that legislation first came out. Having said that, I'm not opposed to helping to collaborate with the LEAs and the and CAPCEF to generate something, but I know there's been a lot of progress made in the last few years around the contract itself. So that was my contract there based on the recollection that of the discussion we had maybe a few meetings ago.
Karen, can you speak to that?
Yeah, so I did speak to some members of CAPCEF about this particular issue, and most approved privates that I spoke to have good contracts, have worked them out. Many, not all, have attorneys that work with them so that when they're working with the Board of Eds or the LEA's attorney, it feels balanced maybe. But there are some small approved privates that don't have the funding for their own attorney and felt like a model contract, as long as it's a model and not a required contract, might help them at least feel like they're entering the game on a level playing field. So that was the feedback from some of the CAPCEF folks that I spoke with.
And the other issue you raised in this, if I remember correctly, was there's something in here about a perception that some special directors think they're getting, the neighboring special education directors getting a better deal.
Right.
And you asked for data on that, which is to say that you don't believe that that's the case.
I would, while I don't, schools charge different amounts based on the needs of the student. And so I would just, and I don't know whether this is true or not. Certainly, I don't have the information about whether this is true. But I would, if there was a district administrator that learned that that was the case, I would encourage that person to work it out, as opposed to us saying this very broad statement that kind of leans toward fraud, that there are, approved privates that maybe are committing fraud and charging people different rates for the exact same services. It just, if this is gonna be about facts, I'm not sure that perception has a place in the report.
Amy, you want to comment on that?
Me? Sorry. Yes, I would agree with that. I mean, the approved privates published what their rates are. It really depends on the individual student, though. There's individual student needs where there are differences, so maybe that's what the perception is. But I've never come across, and I've looked at several, that they tell you what the rates are before you even start. So I do believe that putting a perception that there's differences without facts.
Okay, we'll delete that sentence, but we'll leave in the recommendation for the model contract with everybody's agreement, and then we'll move on to.
I have one further question.
Yeah, so did I.
So where it says, further, the task force will explore the idea of having RESC create a schedule of reasonable costs. I think the challenge to that is, given our state, having, unless it was RESC by RESC, like that can vary greatly from Fairfield County up to northeastern Connecticut, just based on bargaining unit contracts. And I think even in such a small state, the cost can be substantially different. And so I would have caution about that statement if we're looking for it to be a statewide approach.
It's interesting because I came to this task force thinking that a model contract would be a very good thing, and a schedule of anticipated costs for students would be a good thing. Until I've listened to so many of you, and what I think, this may be controversial, but I do believe that every student is different and every student's needs are different. And I believe that it's the responsibility of the district and the private, commodity, so to speak, to work that out for every individual student. I'm not sure, we don't have that many private placements, and I think that it should be done on an individual level. I worry about saying this much for an autistic child, this much for, a behavior, and so on and so forth. It objectifies it too much for me. And so I've changed my thinking on that, just so you know, but, and if there is a case where, a district feels that they're overcharged or whatever, I think then, the State Department of Ed has to become involved and we have to deal with it there. I don't know, what do you think?
Well, I mean, this issue in part came up because CEA submission included the schedule of fees that Massachusetts uses for each of their, for each unit. And there seemed to be that, some effort to move in that direction, but
Can I just make, a recommendation, or not a recommendation, a comment? I think one of the things when you're looking at rest fees and privates is when we get a significant percentage increase in the student tuition, after we've already created a budget, right? So, for example, we just were notified yesterday of, increases to arrest tuition, which is 5%, but when you've already developed and submitted a budget, 5% of our tuition is a lot, right? So is there a way that we can recommend that rate increases, districts are notified of rate increases that align with what districts, I don't say afford, but we're only getting like 3% increases for districts, right? Like, we can't afford this. But there is a volatility, and if there's some more prediction, or we can get, rates have to be set in October for the following school year, or something to that effect, that would make it a little bit easier for districts to navigate those increases. That might be, I'm just trying to think, because the big precipice is, if you've got a $1.5 million budget for tuition, and there's a 5% increase to that 1.5 million budget in February, how are you gonna make up that difference, right? That's what districts run into. And that's why we're always saying to our boards of ed, I'm sorry, but special ed is volatile, right? We're going up and down. We can't predict. Well, that lack of ability to predict puts districts in a real big bind come October of next year, where you're like, oh, well, I did budget my tuition based on what I had last year, but I've got 5% increase here, 10% increase here. And that's for the kids that I knew about, not the newly outplaced kids. So that's just something I think is important.
Good point, Amy.
For us
So maybe we're not ready for a recommendation yet
gonna
on
say
this section.
Yeah.
Perhaps we need some more time to investigate this information further. We can
Yeah.
somehow write
The
that.
recommendation is for the model contract. The statement about, fees is it's something we're gonna explore going forward.
Mhm.
So
I
maybe-
think we could all agree on a strong statement that we oppose inflation, but,
I would love
I completely can appreciate Amy's perspective. Part of the problem for privates, when you pick that date of October, speaking for my private, we don't learn our health insurance rates until after January first.
Right.
So,
right.
and that can be,
Right.
anywhere from 15% to 30%. And so if we pick in October and then so I agree. I mean, I think that we need to think more about this. I don't know that we're ready. And I don't know that it's, maybe I would suggest modifying that statement that just the task force will explore. I don't know. I wouldn't put the burden on the rest. I think we're not ready to do that yet. I think it still needs to stay at the task force level.
Why don't you, send some language to.
I will do
put
that.
in there instead of that sentence?
Yeah.
I think we could also take that sentence out.
Well, we
Yeah.
could-
Can I add one thing? I wonder if, the value of having a model contract helps with the, the variation that we do see in, not only the structure of contracts and the pricing and things like that. If there was a model contract, maybe that takes away some of the confusion, the variation, allows to kind of create some consistency. So less about like the assigning certain things, but more about creating some structure and formality that helps to minimize confusion from different programs, placements, risks, things like that.
Alicia and Mike, let me just ask you, when you are entering into, in Karen, or anyone actually, and when you are entering into an agreement with a private entity, whether it be, whatever, something like Ben Haven or a RESC or whatever, do you have contracts that you work on, and does your attorney work with you on that contract?
Yeah, I mean,
That's what I,
Yes.
yes, I would say yes.
That's what I thought.
The hard part was the initial contract, when you get a new agency you're working with, because it's not so much the pricing that's the fight. It's usually on the other language, God forbid someone gets hurt.
That's what I was referring to, exactly.
I mean, like, responsibility, they don't, usually, both sides don't want to take any responsibility.
Medicaid building is more.
You know what I mean? You know, Medicaid building, like, there's certain things that if we had a model contract, that would just be quicker to get in. We don't usually argue for the price, we know the price going in. Most of these places, like you said, like publish the price and we know what it is, like, well, we had, you know what I mean? It's just more of the nuances that gets cut off, going back and forth, like, I still think a model contract, or at least something that kind of outlines some generic language that most people accept would be helpful. Price is not as big a
yeah,
deal,
it's
I
not the
think.
price, it's really the template.
The
for it.
template, like.
Yes.
Would would that cut down on legal fees? Just asking.
I think it creates clarity and some consistency. So even if it's not consistency in price, that might not always be appropriate, but consistency in what is it that we're asking for from both parties. And I would agree with Mike, from somebody who used to do finances. It's hard to be receiving things that all are, you're wasting time on documents going back and forth and ensuring that they're appropriate, accurate, all of that. So some consistency could be valuable, I would say, for both sides.
I was equating model contract with pricing too, so they're two separate things. Yeah.
Before, we just had like sign off and it'd be quick, you know, that with the contract, I think the lawyers got involved, it's a lot longer before it'd be a price sheet and say, you're sending a student to us, here's what we'll do, here's what you'll do, and we were done. Now, once the contract, there's all this other language that there's certain places try to add, depending on who the lawyers are.
Right.
So I think there's some serious issues in developing that model contract. And my preference is to have it negotiated between the parties first before the state or takes a position on who has liability for injuries, on who does Medicaid billing, all that sort of stuff.
Especially since you have so many, there's a lot of schools that have overarching companies from outside of the state that
That's right.
oversee them, right? So I think you're asking for a lot, and those schools tend to send us their attorney's contract, and then our attorney. I think leaving it between the schools and the districts is more appropriate.
So for this particular number, could we not issue a recommendation right now?
Well, I thought we were in general agreement that the model contract is
Yes.
something we want to do, that we want the parties to
You want
negotiate.
to go with the model?
Yes.
I
Okay.
think there's enough out there too, between the providers and schools that, like Shipman and a couple, and eight, and the rest can get together and kind of come up with a model contract. We have that now for, for the technology we have right now for the student privacy, like there's kind of generic state contract that most people agree to when we sign, so I think the rest.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what we'll go. I think one step
Okay,
work together.
then who,
And a generic one.
I guess then it's, who would develop that model contract? The state?
No,
I think it says between, I think this is fine between a representative, excuse me, of the school districts and
Okay,
a representative of private placement.
all right, perfect. Okay.
let's move on.
All right.
Now, on MBR, somebody, I don't remember exactly who, complained that, we really did not explain MBR. Brian said that, and, that, Brian also said that, there is an exception in MBR for when a high cost student moves to a different school district, but not, when a high cost student graduates, or ages out. And, you know, I would ask Lisa, to really scrub this one closely and, make sure that the recommendation is in fact a sound recommendation, that MBR can be adjusted when a high cost student ages out or, well, I guess, leaving the district, for another district, would reduce the MBR, but, leaving the district for out of state will probably not, I guess, I don't know.
Thank you, Andy. I was not prepared to lead on this conversation. However, I did just Google the exceptions that are currently in statute with regards to NBR and when districts can seek applications to how much they spend moving forward. And the reductions in contract costs associated with collective bargaining agreements, transportation efficiencies, and cost savings in the full district administration. So this is when two districts decide to pool certain expenses and therefore result in savings to the sending district. They can then apply to the State Department of Education. And if Brian were here, I think he could speak more to that, to allow for a reduction in their MBR or how much the district is in total spending. That is also with regards to central office functions. So when two districts pool central office expenses and or healthcare benefit expenses, they can also apply for such reductions. There are reductions from savings of consolidation of information technology, once again, working together from town between multiple districts. There's also with the reduction in total school enrollment, if the district has a significant decline in enrollment, they can then apply for a 5-year look back, which would allow them to reduce the amount that they spend moving forward because they have a reduction in enrollment. But I personally looking at these statutory, or if there's like a catastrophic health emergency, taking that the town realizes if you have a spike in healthcare expenses because you have catastrophic insurance for one of your employees and your expenses spike, you can then apply to get a reduction moving forward, recognizing that those expenses are one-time in nature. But I don't see the exception that Brian is referring to, that if a student graduates or if they move out of state, then they're therefore treated differently with regards to the MBR. So I guess I'd be looking for more clarification from you.
Well, and I'll ask you as a homework assignment to look at that. Yeah, it seems to me that if you've got a kid in the $200,000 placement and he leaves the district, that's probably should have an effect on your MBR. But I want to be clear, you know, I want to be sure that what we're saying here is accurate. I did not see that exception either, and that's why this is in here.
So our organization did a FAQ on the MBR, which lists the exceptions that currently are under statute, and I can send it along to the group, but I don't read that there is an exception for students that leave the district.
Is there any objection to this recommendation that MBR be adjusted for when the high cost student leaves the district?
I mean, I think everybody's getting an increase, so I'm not sure how it helps or hurts, because I think if your district actually went backwards, like less than the year before, districts had major layoffs, so I'm not sure. What I'm trying to say is like, you know, your MBR is a minimum amount of budget. I don't think that means you would have to go less than last year. Correct, right? You're talking about like having less money in your budget than the year before. If any of our districts had less money than the year before, we'd all be hurt.
Yeah.
You might feel inclined to put it in, but I just think if it happened in reality, someone ever like, you know, Marion Public Schools got less money than we had this year, but all the rising costs, we'd be laying off half the people.
Yeah, I agree.
But the way I understand it is Marion has to spend X dollars this year related to what they spent last year.
We got to pay at least as much, right? We got exactly, we had to pay at least as much, but if we went backwards as a district with all the rising costs, the city itself would be really crippling the education system. So one student leaving, I don't think our district, but like our city would never look at this and say, oh, we're going to go backwards because one student left. So
But a
It may
smaller
impact a
district
small
might.
district, yeah.
So if you're really tiny, you have a couple of these, maybe.
I mean, I think this gets the conflict that you see between school district officials and municipal leaders, right? Where municipal leaders might want to reduce the amount that they are spending from the municipal side moving forward, because you do have a student leaving the district and therefore you're no longer responsible for the expenses. However, Mike and other school district officials, I think, would state that if they rightly, they need those resources moving forward and district those resources from the district would have a negative impact on other districts, so, or other students in the district. So I'm not sure where this recommendation came from.
Yeah.
Right, what's, or who's like, you know, pushing this recommendation from the task force. If there was a CCM representative, I'm sure that they would be there. Connecticut Conference of Municipalities, you know, pushing to have these kinds of exceptions put into place.
All right, I'm hearing no major objection to this recommendations, as long as we understand that what we're saying is accurate.
No, I just heard major, we're hearing major.
Yeah, but
The opposite of what we're hearing.
Patrice, what's the problem?
Thanks, and I apologize because I'm having trouble hearing some of the comments, so if someone has already addressed this, but the flip side of this is when the new student with the $200,000 placement comes into the district, the MBR doesn't immediately increase. So I think we have to make sure that we're dealing with both sides of this issue.
I don't think it's as simple as it seems on this, as we're articulating it to be. I'm not sure how, I don't know how, because it will affect both sides, both ways. Not sure.
Sounds
I
like
don't know
maybe
if we're voting on if we're in favor of this one or not, but.
Well, but it is a minimum, so I mean, if a high price student does come in, then you can obviously spend more.
Well, we want to have more, right? If the city gave us more, and they voted to put more money in.
Why should that?
They would have to vote, but they're not gonna ever vote to put more money in the council, whatever, to get back to raise taxes to get more money.
Right.
I just don't know how, like, as a district, we would ever know, like, who would figure this out, that a high price person left.
That's exactly what I was thinking about. I mean,
I don't know, if you figured, like, is it, you know what I mean, like, we have people coming and going all the time in American, like, how, or it's, I know some small districts probably do too, who would determine the students, would the state determine that number, that the high price person left, so it'd be on October 1st?
and what's high priced and, you know.
Well, high prices means less now that the excess cost reimbursement rate is up. Right? I mean.
No, I just don't know, like.
$200,000 placement is probably.
Like, NCR is based off like October 1st, the year before, you know what I mean, like how many students we have at a certain time, how much money we have, like, and this. I guess the state would have to figure out how to determine if a high price student left you versus all the people coming in.
I don't wanna put more work on the district.
Right? Wouldn't it be up to the district and
Yeah.
the same?
Yeah,
We have the district to apply. Just like for the other exceptions.
I mean, the city would, the district, I don't know, okay.
yeah.
What was the
Did
finding?
you say that again, Andy? I couldn't hear you. What did you say?
I said the district would have to apply for the exception like they do for the other exceptions that now exist.
I do know that when.
I think it's a lot of work.
Well,
We're asking a lot. That's a lot of work to ask districts to do that I'm not sure is of high value and should be a top recommendation.
well, what I am hearing from some small districts is a few small districts have a few really high priced kids. And it's a major portion of their budget. And then an MBR adjustment would be appropriate for them. And as like all these exceptions, you know, the school district doesn't have to apply for a change in the MBR, they can.
I just want to know who does this, other than that, who does that help? Like, because the basis is down, the basic we've got to get to is who are we helping in special education? And is this more towards the side of hurting districts to have funding for special education, or is this more on the side of helping? You've got to kind of balance it or find a way that it can still help small districts and but not hurt larger districts. Because even small districts, if they have someone that needs all of a sudden 200,000, they leave. I don't know why they would want to say, take money out of our special education budget, because it's so hard for them to get it into the special education budget. I don't know if anyone right? Because often what happens is, say you have one person that costs them $200,000, and tell me if I'm wrong, that student, that person leaves, if they're a small district, that might be the numbers that lower them down to where they actually lose a special education teacher. Right? They can't afford to pay. Am I correct? In a smaller districts?
Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to know is who is this recommendation? Like, who is it for the greater good for? That's all because I'm hearing a lot of negatives toward that. And you guys are the brilliant geniuses.
It was not a recommendation of the funding, so.
Right.
So yes, where did it come from?
Yeah, so where did it come from?
Anyone know?
Was it Mike or?
No, we didn't recommend it to anybody, no.
No, it's recommend, it's something that's been, it's been a proposal that's been around the legislature, and it's coming from small districts in
It is.
in Eastern Connecticut.
So putting my Board of Finance hat on, because I'm a Board of Finance member in a small town, I could see this benefiting the municipality because they won't have to give the district as much money, right? That's what this is about. So this benefits the municipality, not the schools. And we're all looking at it through a school district lens as opposed to the municipality lens. That would be, it benefits the smaller town that doesn't have to raise taxes to give the district $200,000 more than what they will need. But what they don't look at is the volatility of students coming in and out.
Right, and this
They
is,
may need-
right, and this is special education.
And especially
task force.
like a
Municipality
regional
should handle this on their task. force.
Right, well, think of a regional
Right.
district, right? So a regional district, they can't go back to the town and ask for more money. So.
I know how difficult that is,
So I do see from that lens, if I take my Board of Finance lens and not my school district lens, I can see how it would benefit. But since this is a school task force.
Okay,
I'm gonna-
so it's the consensus that we just eliminate seven and six altogether?
Eliminate. Okay,
Just play both sides.
Yeah, well,
let's go to 7.
those B, eligibility.
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry, B, eligibility. Take a couple of minutes again to, read it through. And take a look at the recommendation.
We were pressed to the recommendation. Leslie raised the issue of the statement that SRBI has fallen into disuse. Wanted data to support that statement. My view is that we have people who are real experts in the system here, and if that's a generally held perception, then I think we can go with it. And I don't know what kind of data you would have necessarily to show that SRBI has fallen into disrepute. But so I think that's one area that we need to talk about. This is, I think Fran wants to talk about this issue. I also want to point out that Brian, may not be with us anymore, made the argument that it is really inappropriate for us to talk about SRBI as an answer to increasing eligibility. The eligibility ought to be an issue totally separate from that. So what's your will on this, Myra?
I know, it's shocking. No, I think it's challenging because we're constantly hearing over-identification, numbers going up, and I think that I kind of push against that a little bit, that's the problem. That's the problem, numbers going up, taking apart the comparison to the states around us, which we know we're comparable, and I think even lower than some of those states. And I think part of this feels to me is like a defensive posture of, it's not our fault, it's because we don't have a robust RTI. And then maybe if we're looking at it from two separate pieces, I think that's valuable because it is completely my view that no one even talks about it anymore when I go to PPTs. They don't even try to raise that we're doing these interventions prior, unless it's like maybe an SLD kid or dyslexic kid. But for any other purpose, I don't hear about any structured intervention process prior. And then you put the parent in a challenging position because this school is pushing them to say, well, either we're gonna put that into place now, too little, too late, and it's not really the parent's problem. Or they're saying, well, how can you know, they're trying to make the parent prove that the kid needs special ed as like this high barrier. So I do think it's valuable to say RTI is an important piece of the whole picture. I don't know that we need to say it in response to there's too many kids in special ed.
I guess I feel pretty strongly about this, and I just want to put my thoughts out on the table. It isn't so much the numbers, and it isn't so much the increase. Although, you know, I wonder why we are increasing to the numbers that we are, but you know, that's not my main area of contention. My main area of contention is if we are increasing those numbers, how are we taking care of those kids in special ed? And, you know, please understand that I want every child to have whatever they need, but I'm watching the achievement gap grow exponentially. And the achievement gap with kids in special ed is the greatest achievement gap we have in the state. And we're putting more children into that category, and the achievement gap is growing and growing. So maybe it's an issue of what kind of standards do we have for children who are in special education? What kind of expectations do we have for them in terms of achieving? When I look at the purpose of special ed, I always heard it was remedial in nature to ensure children have success, like, I never know what to call them, but typical peers, whatever it is. And I'm not seeing that. And so that is one of my concerns. And so it's not so much the numbers, it's about what are we doing for these children when they are in special ed, and how are we ensuring that we have high expectations for every one of them. That's number one. Number two, I go back to my experience in Bridgeport, my first day on the job as interim superintendent, when I asked who does tier 1, who does tier 2, and who does tier 3, and it was answered with the classroom teacher, because there were no interventionists, there were no reading teachers. And so for me, having a robust intervention system is incredibly important. I think we've lost sight of it in Connecticut in terms of, not everybody. There's some districts that have wonderful, robust systems, but I'm wondering if especially in our most challenged districts, does it exist? So those are my issues. It's not that I'm looking to reduce the numbers necessarily, but I am saying, are we providing environments within special education, and are we providing and making sure that we have the expectations for those children in every single district in Connecticut? And at the same time, do we have a robust intervention system in place so that the classroom teacher doesn't jump from the classroom to special ed? And so those are the things that that are concerning to me, that I really would like input from the task force on.
Catherine?
So I think that's a quality of service issue, and that's, the expectations of goals and objectives, making progress on goals and objectives, where are we getting the kids to where they need to be on an individualized basis, right? I think in terms of RTI, it's seen as, when you notice, it's the first thing to go in the budget. Interventionists are the first thing to go in the budget because it's seen as optional, I think, in some cases. I think a district that has resources is going to invest in it because they know that it's helpful for kids and they know that it's helpful structurally for their program and services. But districts that need to cut, that's gonna be the first place they cut. So, you know, I think that we need to make a stronger statement that it's not negotiable. It has to be in place. And of course, that has to partner with advocating for districts that don't have the resources to, or feel they don't have the resources to put that in place. So I'm not saying you just say you have to do it and leave them out to dry, but I do think we need to make a stronger statement that this is not, you know, this is not up for debate when the district, our state has been promoting this for however many years. There's federal promotion of this. All of our expertise in science education have been promoting this. So we know that it's evidence-based and it's important that we make the statement that it, you know, has to be in place.
I do feel very strongly about that. I think it should be a mandate in every district. I probably am very partial to it because when I was associate commissioner and George DeWallaby was bureau chief, we headed up the committee that initially did the RTI, SRBI in the state. And there were workshops and everything all over the place on how we were going to implement it. And somehow or other, I don't hear as much about it. Although when I talk to superintendents, they're, many of them or most of them have it in their districts. But I agree with Catherine, it's the first thing to go. And, there weren't the resources in Bridgeport, so they didn't have it. But it shouldn't be optional.
It shouldn't be in the eligibility heading.
Well, the question is, what does that have to do with special education? I mean, RTI is a general education intervention.
Right.
And also by the same token, right to read is a general education intervention. Both of them probably would have some effect on special education.
Well,
but, I'm not sure that we want to draw a close linkage there.
RTI, in my opinion, is not just a regular ed. It was put together with special ed and regular ed working together on it. I don't know if that's still true in the school districts, but I would imagine that on your RTI team, you have special educators as well.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Well, I think that the real challenge is that there is an issue with the continuum of supports. So the research clearly shows that there's a direct link between evidence-based interventions and special education eligibility. But I think the problem is, and this is just my perspective working with a number of districts with our teacher candidates, is that it's different everywhere you go. And so whatever we teach in terms of teacher prep then gets translated into very different programs. But the issue is that there should be collaboration across special educators and general educators. There should be database decision-making, and then some districts are still using it for eligibility criteria. So I think that's why it's here under the eligibility piece, but I know I'm coming late to the conversations. I think, I echo Fran's perspective in terms of its importance, but I think we've missed the picture of really this tight collaboration and specification of those continuum of supports and what a family can expect, what a student can expect, and really, quite frankly, what we're preparing teachers to be able to do in terms of expert, specially designed instruction, and then what does it look like in the general education setting? What does it look like in the special education classroom? Because we're actually getting more and more research in my area, specifically learning disabilities and literacy, but we're getting more and more research that tiered interventions are actually doing better than special education. So I think that's kind of nationally, but I also see it in my own interactions with districts, so.
Alicia, is that your hand up new?
It sure is my hand. I was just gonna, I would agree 100% with the idea of progression. It's not black and white, it's gray. And so these two systems don't live separately. And I think in absence of, if we don't say anything about RTI or SRBI and the idea, because there is research to show the impact of highly effective intervention on student growth for all students. And so I would feel like if we removed it, maybe it's not in the right place, maybe we need to think about it, but I think it needs to be there. So I'm in support.
And I do remember when we had our panel of superintendents here, we did ask them if they saw special ed as a piece along the continuum of support that was needed for students. And I'd like to envision special ed in a continuum of support.
Okay, yeah,
Mike?
Yeah, I just like a lot of this, like Bridgeport, Meriden, like, if we don't have RTI in this, they could just go to special, like, they'll just end up there because we have nothing else to put them. So I think like that's why, like, I know it's not directly related to how they're identified, but by not having this or saying that we need to have this, people get identified and they need support.
And it'd be about 70 or 80% of your students.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? People need support, so like, I think it may be not directly fit, like, we don't wanna over-identify kids because of this, or this be the reason they get identified, but this helps us in this process.
Catherine.
By stating.
Then I promise I'm done. Actually, I don't promise. But the continuum is not linear. I think that's the only thing. You know, and I think that a lot of schools oversimplify that in their heads, not purposefully. I think there is a perception of that, of like special ed, last stop on the train, off the triangle, point of the triangle, whatever it is. So I just want to be really, really careful in our language. And I think that I'm guessing that's Brian's point, and I'd love to hear when he comes back, that he doesn't want, you know, RTI to be seen as the whole process you take before you go to special ed. And so I think we can make all the statements, I just think they can be really careful in our language.
Well, one of the problems I think we have is that, one of our clear charges had to do with eligibility. And the numbers are unmistakably going up substantially in the last decade. At least for me, I am unable to draw any conclusions that the increase in numbers represents over-identification. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I don't have any evidence that it does. And so I do think, you know, we need to comment on the increased eligibility numbers, but I'm not sure what we have to say about that. So that's the eligibility, and then this continuum of services. I think that Mike's absolutely right, that as a practical matter, whether it's legal or not, as a practical matter, kids are found eligible for special education when there aren't other services in the district that can meet the students' needs.
And I think if Tiffany was here, she would say that shouldn't be the case, and that, you know, all of the whole school community owns these kids, right? And has responsibility for these kids, and it's not, you know, just the special department to fix everything at the end.
And I think that's Brian's point, right? And we're also not allowed, for lack of a better word, to stop the special education eligibility process because of the lack of SRBI. And that's really important to remember. So really keeping a very defined divide between the two is really important.
Well, my thought is to redraft this to talk about increase in eligibility, and basically say that we have nothing much to say about that.
Right.
But that there's also this continuum of services, and you know, and I would include, you know, frankly, I would include Right to Read as part, together with RTI as the types of system-wide interventions that are going to meet students' needs early, you know, and should be part of a continuum of services to include special education.
I have no problem with that. I just want to make sure that it's in there, because I worry about it not being in there. And let me just ask you, do you have any concern about the numbers rising from 11 to 17%?
I think when you ask, right, because we're always analyzing the eligibility in the district.
Can you speak up just a little, Amy?
Sure, absolutely. I think we're always analyzing, who we're determining eligible in the district. The kids are just needier. We're not over-identifying kids that don't qualify. It's just, for some reason, they're needier.
Yeah.
And you look at, you know, actually, I was just having this conversation with my superintendent yesterday, because I've got 2 grade levels where my numbers are huge, and it's my 5th grade and it's my 8th grade, right? So your first graders that learned how to read virtually, and your 6th graders that entered middle school in a home, like mixed up thing, and you've got a lot of kids that, not lack of instruction, we did the instruction we could, missed those basics, and they were just never able to catch up, and then you do develop a learning disability because you've missed everything and you just can't process, right? But you also have a lot of emotional, you've got a lot of ADHD, just a lot of things that kids are struggling. It's reality. It definitely is reality. So, is it concerning? Yes, but do I think we're over-identifying just because there are some districts that struggle with the intervention process, right? Is special education a dumping ground at times? It is. But I think it's difficult to say that globally that the increase in eligibility is because of all I think it's all a big thing. Maybe see some things with right to read, maybe. But my district is one of those districts that actually got the waiver because our reading program is so strong. My LD numbers are still going up. We've been working with Literacy Out for 5 years. I've got every regular ed teacher in my district trained in structured literacy, and they are doing it every single day. Do I still have LD kids and my numbers going up? It is. So can you correlate 1-to-1? No, you can't. So, I think it's hard for us to make a global comment that that's.
It's dangerous, I think.
It's dangerous.
Right.
Yeah, no, the interesting thing is the growth in eligibility, it's largely in the LD side, not in the ED side.
Right.
Which is
Right.
fascinating because we've been talking about increased anxiety, depression and all that and post-COVID. That's not what the numbers are showing.
Well, there's a link, a direct link, I think, and that's where that MTSS piece comes in as an option that's linking both the academics and the social emotional ADHD. It really is, if kids are struggling to read, if kids are struggling to write, if they're struggling academically with learning disabilities, there's a lot of anxiety that, what chicken or the egg, but a lot of anxiety kids that are presenting with that, but.
And the chronic absenteeism numbers are insanely high, so I would venture to guess there's, especially the older now would be potentially eligible ED kids are not even there to deal with.
And that's starting earlier and earlier, right? So if you're not available in school, families aren't, I shouldn't say it that way. Chronic absenteeism is starting in preschool, right? So it is something that districts are struggling with big time. School phobia, school avoidance. Kids just connected to technology, and there's so much research out there that the more time that you're on a computer, and we're all 1-to-1 now, right? After COVID, every kid has a computer or a device in front of them in school and out of school. And research is saying that is impacting our students. It's impacting our society. There's a lot of factors there.
Amy, when you say that, I've always argued that schools are just mirror images of the community, and I think our nation is suffering right now from lots of anxiety and other things happening. All you have to do is drive on the roads and see the aggression that I didn't see a few years ago. So
Well, let's move on here.
well, let's wait, Andy, for a
Okay.
minute, if you can. I do believe that the numbers are increasing. I came at it as, wow, this is really serious, but we're still not addressing. I'm not going to argue that the numbers are increasing and we don't know why, and that's fine, and we shouldn't make a statement on that, and I don't feel that we need to, but I still would address the fact that the achievement gap is also growing exponentially. And I worry about that because every child that is in special education should not be relegated to achieving less than children in regular ed, so to speak. And so I would hope that at some place in this report, we say something about that. Because I do think that that is incredibly important. And with that, I'm gonna ask that we take a break. It's 10:30. We'll take a 10-minute break.
I thought you were coming up with I thought you were about to come up with a proposal that we ban cell phones in schools, which I'd be all for.
I kind of love it.
I'm against it for safety.
I'd like to ban,
And for
serious.
technology and sometimes feeling way who's nonverbal can make a
And
friend.
I'd like to ban email. Okay.
I'm agree with that.
Let's take a break. Huh?
This recommendation up here, we haven't really.
Then we have standalone
This is
master's programs that people go home and do the 1 year.
So let's go,
Discipline.
Andy said, and you know, we're still playing with the idea of maybe it's recommendation, maybe it's finding. Because I thought the interim report was findings, so, you know, you can word it in a way that it might. You know, some of us, you know, there is consensus here on the recommendation, but I prefer to keep it in findings if we can.
Okay, so the first recommendation on that page has to do with RTI, except for its placement within eligibility. Is there any objection to that recommendation?
Wait, could you?
It reads, the task force recommends that the State Department of Education encourage school districts to establish and maintain strong RTI programs, particularly in the early grades, by establishing rubrics against which to judge effective RTI programs and rating districts against those rubrics.
Well, personally, I'm not a mandate person, but on this one, I feel strongly enough that the State Department of Education should mandate that every school district have a, RTI, MTSS, SRBI system, whatever you wanna call it. And I'll tell you why. You know, first of all, I think it's essential, we all said that. But, it's also helpful in districts when we're going to get our budget to be able to say, well, I'm sorry, this is mandated, we can't do without this. That's the practical side of it. So I would, unlike me, usually, I would change it to mandate.
You also made another change, which was both RTI and MTSS. And MTSS is quite a different beast.
Andy, did you say that? I thought that someone said that we should separate it from eligibility.
Exactly.
Okay, great, wonderful.
Any objection to this as a mandate?
I was just wondering about by establishing rubrics, I wonder if we should, against which to judge, I wonder if we could say something about like establishing criteria. Because criteria really leads to creating a vision of what we hope it to look like, and then you can use that to assess it. But it sounds, it's wordy, it's wordsmithing. I don't know if that's what we're doing now, but I just thought maybe we might want to consider criteria.
I think they have, I agree, but I think they have a lot of criteria already, and maybe instead of updating, I mean, they have volumes of what it's supposed to look like, right? I don't know if it's updated, but.
I think they do have rubrics available, but, I think that in terms of wordsmithing, I do think we need to kind of clarify MTSS, RTI, SRBI, because what I'm seeing kind of across districts is the move to MTSS where RTI is kind of part of that, but I think sometimes it's confusing to everyone. What are we talking about? What do we mean? So maybe just kind of clarifying that and then creating the criteria.
I would be glad to accept your language on that.
Great, all right, I'll give it to you.
I would love to call it one thing. I never know whether to call it RTI, SRBI, or MTSS, so I'd love to.
We call it alphabet soup when we teach it to
Yeah,
pre-service teachers, because it's so confusing.
Okay, and then the next recommendation, Alicia can talk to, that was, she was promoting, the training on UDL and culturally sensitive pedagogy.
Well, I wouldn't say Alicia was promoting it. This comes from the services subcommittee, not me personally, just to be clear. But it was about, well, let's be clear, because it's not my personal recommendation, but it was about high quality, effective tier 1 instruction that benefits all students.
Is there any objection to that recommendation?
This is Jason. I would just simply say, we barely have enough PD time as it is. So I'm just curious as to where we think we'll be able to do this. Would this be in educational programs as they're training to become teachers? Or are we expecting this to be, again, another mandate that we have to fulfill during our, again, scarce professional development time?
Glad you spoke for Patrice on that issue. If she were here, she would make a big point about that.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
we're doing right to read, everybody's doing right, something for right to read, right now, it's already out there. Right, where everybody's training on it, the districts, I don't think the big leap. Any of this stuff for new training, I don't see it like new training, I see it's kind of incorporated what we're doing every day at good teaching, and that's what we're trying to follow in schools, I think it's not that big a lift, it's not like you're asking somebody another hour of training, so that doesn't fit in with the normal teaching, but that's just my.
Sally, is there a deficit in the teacher preparation on issues of UDL or culturally?
No, we definitely address it. We speak about it. We connect culturally responsive teaching to universal design for learning, but then I do see it kind of being a drop off in the field when our candidates go out and work with special ed teachers that they're not as familiar with it, or even gen ed teachers. So, I mean, it was specifically named in, ESSA, so it was named as a way to address this continuum of supports. But I certainly understand the tension with all the professional learning that's coming at districts. So I support this, but I understand that tension.
Do we have to, oh, go ahead, sorry about that.
Yeah, I think it can be a foundation for everything else. If you really understand UDL, you kind of understand how it fits with all the other pieces, but it would need to be kind of cohesive and connected.
I wonder if, rather than saying like the State Department has to provide training, if we propose it more as, you know, providing professional learning opportunities, or so that maybe it's not, we're not saying it's a mandate, but we're saying that this is best practice, or maybe there's a different way to suggest it. So I don't know that we have to say the state has to provide training on this, but rather that one of our findings is that, because you're writing it as a recommendation, we wrote it as a finding, that as a finding, these are best practices. We didn't say the State Department has to provide training on it. So maybe that's where it got a little mixed up. Because it is foundational and it does benefit all. And I would completely agree that there is a disconnect between what's happening at the university and what's happening in practice. And maybe this is an opportunity to build that.
I'm wondering, Alicia, if you could provide wording for that, because I like the professional opportunity piece.
Of course, yeah.
Okay, so you got a finding and add that language. And then we come on the next page to really huge recommendation. Which is, you know, one of these questions about whether, you know, I think we all agree that maximum class size ought to be reduced. That class up, that smaller classes are better educationally for all kids. Is it a recommendation we want to make? Is it something that really comes from this task force?
Does anyone know the numbers, how we compare to, say, Massachusetts or Rhode Island?
I think that's not the issue. I think the issue is that in Bridgeport, the grade 1 has 29 kids in it.
Right.
And in,
With
you
no
know,
para,
huh?
with no para.
No power. And in Wilton, the average first grade class is 16. I don't
I
think.
like it.
I know the town that I live in just voted to not add school classrooms to a new building because they didn't want, the school wanted to lower the class size, and the town voted against the tax, to raise the taxes to make that possible, that we can have lower amount of class size in kindergarten. So I just don't know if this is something that even if you mandate it, can you make it actually happen with the towns? Because I agree, but it also seems to me like if we had more para in the classroom, that would change. If you have 29 kids and you have 2 extra paras walking around, just checking in on everybody, there's your multi-tiered support, and there's your, so that's my opinion, but I just know my town said no way. And they have small class sizes.
Well, I don't believe you're bound by the vote of your town in
You
this
aren't?
task force.
Okay. No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that, is this something that you can make actually happen?
Well, I think it's the first step, I
Okay.
think, the way it's worded.
No, I think lower class sizes are amazing. It's just.
It's a huge financial issue.
Well, it's not only financial, it's also space.
Right.
And finding the people,
I was
finding the
gonna say,
teachers.
and we have the teachers
Right.
to do, right?
We don't have any of
already
the
have
above. We don't have any of the above, but I still
Yeah.
believe that, if we believe it's best practice in education, that it should go in there. Even if we don't have the teachers, you know, I can tell you that, space, yes, it is an issue. But I remember doing co-teaching, with brand new candidates and bringing them in to work with, master teachers and splitting the class in half and doing co-teaching. And then having that teacher move on to have her own class the following year. There's a lot of creative solutions that could be put in place. And if we absolutely believe it, I do believe it in the early grades. And you know, I could be really radical and say, if I had 15 kids in a class, I could do wonders with those kids as a, teacher. You know, I know that's probably not reality, but, I'll tell you the truth, it would cut down a lot of expenses in other places if, a highly trained teacher was working with 15 kids. I know we have a lot of barriers to it and a lot of challenges, and people have told me forever that it's something that can't be done. You know, it's gotta be negotiated and so on and so forth, but I think if people keep hearing it, it's really important for policymakers to keep hearing that educators believe that this is really important in K-3.
Fran, this is Jason. I totally agree with your sentiment. I guess my only concern is making recommendations that we feel and we believe are best practice. It's going to get all cluttered up. I mean, if I had my way, it would just be like just a few recommendations that we actually thought could happen. We put all of our weight behind it, because if we give moving target and we do best practices, that's not really my knowledge of what this task force is for. I mean, we have a lot of things we could say, but we'd have to show, in my mind, definitive proof that smaller class sizes would help with special education in the state. And I believe it, but I don't think statistically I'd be able to find evidence for it. Maybe you guys can. Maybe if we talk about class sizes in special education classrooms, or a bigger concern of mine is the ratio of students who have IEPs to the regular education peers in classrooms. That, I think, is a large concern that I'm not sure we've ever dealt with. I thought there once was a law that you couldn't have more than 50% of students with IEPs in a regular classroom and still call it, you know, typical peers, a regular classroom. But that happens regularly now in our school, and we're a well-off suburban school in Waterford.
That still is the law for Quinndale. But, well, what's the sentiment on this sort of recommendation? Fran obviously is for it. This is one of these recommendations, like RTI, MTSS, like Right to Read, which is just good education. And good education, you know, is probably going to, you know, reduce the strain on special ed in a way.
So I wonder, you know, my understanding of this report was that it was going to be findings and not recommendations.
That's correct.
And I think there are some that we all feel good and we're kind of jumping towards, maybe we can recommend it now, a year early. I wonder if we really pull back and just think about findings and allow us the time that we need maybe to do, you know, to get to some of Jason's questions about this. And, you know, we don't have to have all the answers in January of 2024. This is our interim report. And there may be a way ultimately that we structure our final report such that, you know, here are some findings and some best practices. At this point in time, this is what the task force is recommending. So it includes some of the other pieces that we all embrace and want to say, yes, logistically and financially, some of those may be hard, but then we really put our weight behind these specific recommendations.
I like that.
And can't part of our findings be that there are things that we'd like to dig deeper and get more research on? Like, you know, like leave the door open on some of these things that maybe we want to continue the conversation, but we're not there yet with a recommendation.
Right.
Yeah, because I don't know exactly what the number is in, when I say smaller class size, I don't know what the number is that really makes the, big difference, you
And Fran,
know.
you're talking about class size across the board, not just special ed. You're talking about.
Oh, no,
every single class.
I'm talking general ed.
Right, you're talking about everybody, because I know as a person who works at a rest with transition adults, I have 4 students in my classroom. And that's, it could be, especially when you don't have parents, right? Again, the lack of staff and depending on who they're coming in, and their challenges at any given time, any given day, any given hour. So like that, I do recommend special, that definitely has to be low class size, but even like in our therapeutic populations, they tend to get a little bit more as well, without the lack of money, the lack of staff. So that's why I was just wanting to clarify, because yes, I would say for special ed, definitely. It would be a beautiful world. In a perfect world, our belief statements, a resolution would be small. That's a resolution to me, not something that we can actually back. I wish I could say that, and I would love it, but again, we don't have the numbers. I think you need more information.
I would be perfectly happy with saying it, as a finding that, class size matters. And that in spite of the challenges of space and teachers and, lack of teachers, lack of paras, we still want, the legislature to understand that class size matters. Because we're writing this for the legislature. I'm not saying that we make a recommendation on there. But a finding, I think, would be, I just think the report would be lacking without it.
Yeah, and in the interim, our organization did a literature review of optimal class sizes. But that was probably 5 years ago, so it's probably a little bit dated. I could ask my team to dust it off and to see if there's any updated research, academic research that we can all look at. I know that the data is kind of limited with regards to class sizes across the state, which is how districts report up to the State Department of Education, but I'll also ask my data team to think about class sizes to see if we can get any numbers and look district by district, for average classes across the state of Connecticut, just to provide a little bit more context to this conversation moving forward.
And legislators are gonna wanna know additional data. They're gonna wanna know other states, what their class sizes are, and then what their numbers are, of students that are going to special education or else they wanted. So they like to have that information at their fingertips, so I don't know where they get that.
It's also an important disparity issue that's quantifiable and that's concrete. And of course, kids have different needs in different districts perhaps, or there's a lot of other factors, but I think it's something that can, shock the conscience. That might be important.
And of course, it still means having an effective teacher in the classroom as well, one that teaches 18 kids differently from 30 kids, right? That it matters. If I could just for a minute, as a young teacher, brand new teacher, I had 32 kids my first year in the east side of Bridgeport. And then a couple of years later, there were renovations being made. And so we were moved, and for some reason, who knows what, I had 17 kids. And that's what it really hit me, because I really saw the difference that I could make, especially in reading with those 17 kids, that I couldn't make when I had 32. So it's a long-term, thing with me. I just believe it matters.
Moving on, the next recommendation has to do with the development of the light category. And what I put here was changing the age to 7. We can go up to 9 under federal law. What people's feeling about this?
This was a part of our subcommittee, and this is not what our recommendations to the group was, actually what we ended up with. Right, with our eligibility, I had our notes from our October meeting is, we were like, until the age of 8 years old, if specialized instruction is required only in the absence of identifiable disability category like autism, hearing impairment, speech, language impairment, after a comprehensive evaluation. But then Brian spoke. at one of our meetings and said that it just maybe, it doesn't need to be changed, the age, but maybe we just need to tweak the identification, right? Like we were talking about autism checklists. I just want to make sure I'm on the right track.
No.
Okay,
I
good.
remember that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it looks like he's back on.
Yeah. I can speak for him.
There you go.
Is he really?
No, he's not there.
He's not there.
He
Oh, it
was.
says.
It says name is there, but
Yeah.
maybe he can't speak.
Maybe. In the meeting?
Yeah.
If we
All right.
click that
Love to
X,
talk
we can
now.
maybe see more.
I'm here. I'm back.
Yeah.
I'm just about back to the office.
Okay, so this is
Sorry,
development.
Andy, was there a question for me? I heard, the discussion around the developmental age, recommendation to adjust that.
What's your feelings on that? Brian?
Well, again, I think, going back to our conversation that we had, I think there was, there's definite pros and cons. I know that, originally there was discussion about, removing that. So there is flexibility. The federal government allows that category of developmental disability, from the age of 6, to change at the age of 6 all the way through the age of 9. So we're kind of within our parameters as long as we come to an agreement. We've had some really great conversations with CONCASE over the years, previous years, again, on the pros and cons of doing that, the purpose for doing, the reasoning behind it. I'm not sure we got into a lengthy discussion through the task force about the purpose and the reasons, but I know the subcommittee's been working diligently on that. So at the State Department, we would need time to adjust in our federal reporting. We have pretty robust systems in place right now for monitoring and oversight of that provision. So we would just need to work in concert and coordination with, our parents and families and school districts.
So, yeah, so we do think it is appropriate to move it up for the reasons actually you had stated in here. For those students that there isn't that identified disability by age 6, we tend to then determine not eligible, but then in a year or two are back in, right? So, yeah.
I'm in disagreement with this one, just because of the way I see this play out usually. And again, I'm only giving my vantage point. I think if you want to keep a kid eligible, there's other ways you can do that. If that's the case, but the vast majority of the time that I'm looking at this and I'm at that juncture with a client, it's because the school is saying they don't want to qualify the kid, under, autism. And so I just worry that the more we extend this, the more that we're gonna keep this kid in this kind of hazy place. And that, we're still gonna see that hesitation of identifying the kid, in the category of autism.
And that's why we added the specific state.
Yeah,
Well, but
I would like to see more data though.
The eligibility category should not affect services.
Sure, Andy, of course.
It doesn't.
Of course it shouldn't. You don't get to go into the small classroom in a lot of districts unless that is checked off on your IEP. You don't get to go to meet with this certain provider unless that's checked off on your IEP. That's just the practical aspect of it.
Brian, your hand is raised?
Sorry, I was just gonna make the same comment that you did, Andy, that the disability category is an entryway into services, and does not drive programming, should not drive programming. But I hear Catherine talking about her experiences, so that's something that we have to address. And so, I don't view developmental delay as a gray area for students. I see it as an entryway into accessing the needed individualized supports and services for students. And whenever that transition happens, teams have to be prepared to adjust that. We don't see, from a state level, students being exited and then being re-identified after. I'm not saying that doesn't happen in circumstances and individual cases. We just haven't seen that as a persistent issue in the state.
Right, and that's why I brought up, because you had mentioned that, do we really need to change the age? Or do we just need to change how it's the system? Does that make sense?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I was just saying, do we need to, also with Brian, that's what I heard at our last, when Brian was talking, that's why I was like, oh, it was different than our subcommittee, it's just that. Is it working the way it is now or does it need to be changed? Or does it just need to be tweaked?
I think this is one of Concase's biggest.
It is.
Issues.
Okay.
We really, really feel that it would benefit students if we do this.
Could we see data though on what's happened, like, well,
Yeah, we collected tons for last year. We have all the states and everything like that, so I can get you more data if you need it.
yeah, if you could share it, that'd be great.
Absolutely. But we feel very strongly that this would benefit students. And we met with the education committee about this last year. We did a lot of testimony about this, in terms of how it would benefit students.
Mostly because of what you said, the situation of having to exit and come back.
Right, because you can't have a learning disability when you're, haven't had, you know, especially now, take it this way, especially now that we've moved the eligibility age for kindergarten to you have to be 5 by September. So when you're turning 6, you're still in kindergarten. So if you don't have an OHI or you don't have a speech and language impairment, there is no ability for us to continue to try to catch you up on the developmental delay that you had when you were 3, because there is no other, you know, we haven't been able to give you all the education you need. So then you're either doing one or two things, you're over-identifying speech and language impairment, or you're creating a learning disability that's not necessarily there, but you really can't do because you can't check the box that says that child has had all of the reading and math and writing instruction that they needed because they're only in January of their kindergarten year. So
Why couldn't you use OHI?
because why would you do that? That's not their true disability. Like you need to.
Well, how do you define OHI?
OHI, the medical impairment. So not every kid that has a developmental delay has a medical impairment. That's what OHI is, it's medical. So you can't just slap a label on a kid. And that's what you're recommending doing, is that we just slap a label on a child. And that's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to say, let's get that kid that specialized instruction until they've been in school for a good 1 to 2 years, at least the end of first grade, so we can say whether or not they've been able to respond to the reading, writing, and math instruction, so they have a learning disability or not. Right now, you've got a kid in kindergarten that's turning 6, you gotta make up your mind. Do I drop this kid and say, there you go, you're all set? Or do you say, oh, I'll say that you have a learning disability, even though you've only had 5 months of kindergarten instruction? Like, that's not, you know, when we talk about over identification, that's one of the things that you really need to consider. There are definitions of what these disabilities are, we just can't randomly place that disability category in kids. So that's, you know, that's our point of view. This extension of developmental delay will allow us to provide that specialized instruction for those, I don't want to say gray area students, but those students who came up to birth at 3, they had a delay, they had preschool, but now in kindergarten, you're saying, well, even though you had a developmental delay for the first 5 years of your life, you're turning 6, so we have to figure out what that is. It's not always defined by, you need to have a good 2 years of solid instruction for us to say whether or not you can have the ability to learn. Does that make sense? I mean,
Let me
that-
suggest, let me throw out this suggestion,
Mhm.
which is that you can use developmental delay in an IEP of a kid in kindergarten or first grade, but not in second grade or beyond.
I would not disagree with that.
How do you feel about that, Catherine?
But I do want to recognize, right, even though I totally disagree, like, I get where you're coming from, there may be experience in the district that do this. We should not be developing programming based on label. So, and I think that's why our task force committee came up with that statement of, if there is a defined disability by the age of 6, then that should be on the IEP. Like, if you've got autism and you're 6.
Sure.
But if you have autism and you're 3, it should be on the IEP, you should be waiting, right? So, you know, that's
just not, I mean, this is not how it works, and I feel really strongly about that. With a lot of experience with the young child population of, not classifying a kid as autistic, questioning the parent, who's this doctor, how often have you seen this doctor? Oh, this is a psychiatrist, not a pediatrician, I mean, just like back and forth. So I do feel like that's not a one-off anecdotal thing, I think it's a quite common thing, especially in low-income districts. I'd love to hear more perspective, I'd love to see the data. I think, I personally don't feel comfortable going forward with this without understanding the data more as to like, if you really do have to kick kids out of special ed, which I don't know why you would have to, because you could probably find a way.
Well, you
And
could, but
I also think it's like, I'm sorry, but practically, yes, label does define programming in many, many districts. I urge you to spend some time at PPTs to hear how people talk about programming. You can't do that unless you have this label all the time.
well, if the choice is between autism and developmental delay, yes, I prefer the kid be characterized as autism. But the choice all too often is between developmental delay and no LE. And no
What about speech and
eligibility.
language, like she just said, speech and language.
Because what if their testing comes back that they don't have a language impairment? Like, you can't, I totally vehemently disagree with just placing a label on a kid because you need to continue something. We have to be able to do the right thing, you know, like, you do testing, speech and language scores are average, you're not gonna just plot the speech and language impairment on them. You can't make up a medical diagnosis, and it has to be what's impacting their ability to learn. So that's, you know, that's where findings comes from, and we feel very strongly.
Yes, Jennifer.
I just wanted to, I wanted to agree with Catherine, because we hear the same things, at CPAC about like the autism piece, and it's a constant problem. Kid clearly is on the spectrum and is not being identified because they can keep him in developmental delay. So I acknowledge that, and I think our group talked about if we're gonna extend the, developmental disability age, that we do some other things also, such as update the autism guidelines, provide training to districts and using it and things like that. So I wanted to, you not to be alone in that, sentiment.
I get it.
And I think we could find some happy medium, like in between it, as long as, but again, not just saying, oh, extend it, but we really have to recognize that that's a real concern. And I think specifically with autism, that you hearing impaired.
Brian, where are we on updating the autism guidelines?
He's gonna be new on that.
Yeah, I think he.
Give him a break. He's driving and doing 10.
I'll do it done. All right. No, I mean, I do agree that the autism guidelines are desperately in need of updating. But I also think that you see, I think that, you know, given the scenario you were talking about, Captain, where the parent is grilled about autism diagnosis, the option is no services at all. Not, you know, finding a different label. Which is why I tend to, you know, agree that, you know, I think that, you know, there's gotta be a cutoff of when you can use developmental disability, but, you know, I would be inclined to permit it through first grade.
I mean, through age 7, wanna say first grade, almost.
Well, I mean, I think it makes sense to do it, to base it on the grade of the student, you know, not necessarily, whatever.
I think that, I mean, that gives you the time of instruction. I mean, it says, people think 6, you know, sorry, the way it is 6. So if we extend it to age 7, that's gonna get you. And I think you're right, the kindergarten cutoff age would, that is a definitely consideration.
It is, it really is.
I think that is probably the deciding factor of.
Because you're still having 6-year-olds that are at 2.
Yeah, no, I get that.
Did you put the wordings from our subcommittee into the document? Because that would be super
Well,
helpful.
I mean, my concern about that exception.
Right.
Well, of course a kid should be given a label and not developmental delay, and I think that's already the current rules.
Right, and maybe that's just.
We're just restating existing policy.
It is. And I think Brian would agree with that it's unfortunate that you're running into districts that aren't doing that. And that's frustrating, and I respect that, and I do see that. So the question more is how do, maybe, we just having a conversation with Brian about how we give more guidance to districts that's not, yeah, right, like, they can't be doing that.
Well,
We have conversations about all that, all the time, that we can't design instruction basically.
And autism of all, I mean, you know, autism of all ages, that is a real gateway.
I have a quick question. So if somebody has a language and communication plan, they don't get one, and could someone answer this until they get their IEP? Because if it just says developmental delay, and it doesn't say they have a hearing loss or something like that, then they don't get a language and communication plan?
So
Can
the
you break that down for me?
disability does not determine the plan, right? So if you file with the 504 for an IEP that has a diagnosed hearing impairment, whether they're getting services for that or not, has a language communication plan.
Right.
So just like any child that has a deficit in reading needs to have access to accessible educational materials, right? So no, one doesn't drive the other.
Okay, because I didn't know if there were some of the school districts that just said, well, this just says we are supposed to say developmental. Like, we aren't supposed to say, we're not categorizing your child at this
Yeah, so
point.
any individual that has a hearing impairment, whether that's their primary disability or not, to do that.
Ryan, you're back.
Back on the laptop.
So the question is, where are we on revising the autism guidelines? There he is.
He's on his green screen, he's back.
Hi, folks. Oh. Okay. So the question was, where are we at revising the autism start guidelines? Is we haven't started. It's on the list of recommendations. We have looked at and know the importance of updating eligibility guidelines, but we're just in the initial stages of reviewing that.
So Brent and I were just discussing, we probably are gonna need an additional meeting during the month before our February 1st revised deadline. And at this point, I'm gonna leave this recommendation the way it is, subject to further discussion. And you know, if Catherine and Amy can have some discussions about a middle ground there, that would be helpful.
And I would suggest that, I do think we need another meeting, and I wanted to throw out to the group, the possibility of January 23rd. Any objections?
What time are you thinking, Karen?
Same time, 9:30 to 11:30. Same place.
I can do that. Thanks.
Okay, anybody strongly disagree?
I'll have to leave early. I have to
Okay,
leave early.
I can start it, we can start it earlier. You wanna start it at 9? 9 to 11? Okay.
Sure.
9 to 11 on the 23rd.
With the real goal of coming up with a report that we can issue on February 1st.
Which I think is gonna be pretty tough, because we still have a lot in here, guys, and we have other things to consider, so I'm not 100% sure that, that revised date is gonna be met, but I wanna get it right first. So if we may have to ask for additional meetings in there, you know, during that beginning of, end of March, end of January, beginning of February. Because I see how fast we don't move, and that's fine, do you know what I mean? And some of them will go through quickly, but most, I think, are gonna require, I mean, for instance, I don't even wanna start on the next one right now, because we're ending at 11:30, and the next one is seclusion and, restraint. And I think that's a vigorous discussion, you know, that will begin, on the 23rd, and I would just ask that we read it through again, that if you wanna make changes, make them in the document. I think there are a few things here we can go through very quickly, but, you know, this is heavy weighty stuff, and, I think the expectation that we're gonna have it by February 1st is not quite.
Fran, I know,
I'm more optimistic,
should we extend the meeting time, just so we have more time, given that
I
everyone's
certainly
here?
would be happy to do that. We could extend it from 9 to 1.
Yeah.
I would.
I was
love-
gonna ask that same thing, if potentially extending the time, and then I wonder if we could gain some clarity around, are we gonna write this as findings or recommendations? Because we've gone back and forth.
I think that's an issue on each and every one of these. Each recommendation, each finding, are we ready to make a recommendation, or do we wanna do it as a?
But is
finding?
I guess, to be clear, is our task to write a report with findings, or is our task at this point to write recommendations? And we should come to our next meeting knowing that, because that does matter. And it kind of goes to purpose and intention of our writing piece, and also how we read it and give feedback. So I think we want to be really clear on that, because we've gone back and.
Well, I think we're not clear on that. I think the statute says, findings first time and findings or recommendations a year from now. However, both, Chairman Curry and Ranking Member McCarty have told us they're receptive, that they actually want recommendations that can be done in this session.
Then we should only recommend things that we are really
Yes.
sure of, and that we have the data behind us and the information behind us.
Right.
Because we then can't find something and go back.
It's also a short session, right?
Yeah.
We might,
Which
it
just
might,
means we do the same things in a few shorter weeks.
well,
It
I
doesn't-
wonder
that-
if we just wait until we have the longer session.
You know, the short session is sort of a myth. I mean, all it means is that individual members can't do bills, but committees can do bills on anything, and they do. And, you know, the experience in the last 3 short sessions, which I've worked pretty closely, is they are almost, except for length of time, they're largely indistinguishable in terms of substance from the longer session. So I think that's not a, you know, not a very valid argument, unfortunately, based on the reality of it.
I think one of the valid arguments is that, you know, there's not gonna be funding, probably in this session, because we're in the second year of the biennial. But I think Andy's right on, I haven't seen too much difference between, short and long in terms of recommendations. But I would say, I'm comfortable with saying, generally speaking, we're looking at findings here. If the committee feels very strongly about some things going forward as recommendations, we'll put them forward as a recommendation, but generally speaking, it's findings. Is that okay with everyone?
Yeah.
And 9 to 1 would be wonderful on the 23rd. We'll provide lunch and, you know, we'll work right through. I think we could get a whole lot done then.
If you please go through the rest of this report, and if there's some recommendations that you know there's no form of which you can live with, please let us know, and we'll just drop it at this point. But on the other hand, if there are other areas of recommendations or findings that are not covered here, please also note that, you know, what are we missing?
I just wanted to ask, was the behavior section, was that done, that's listed under eligibility?
Oh, it's under our.
Yeah, it's supposed to be
It was
under.
supposed to be under, but we never went over anything.
Yeah.
No, because then it was taken away, so.
So no,
Yeah, so we never.
so nobody, no
Nobody.
subcommittee worked on this behavior
No, it was
section.
supposed to be-
So where did it come,
Yeah.
where'd the language come from?
Oh, was it taken away?
Well,
Because we didn't do anything.
And then, the SAC, we worked on it, and I put in the comments, the 2 things we talked about, notifying parents at a reasonable time, that changing that.
Okay.
So that came from just the SAC. But our group,
No,
we were supposed to do it, and then.
It's a meaty one.
Yeah.
And a really important one.
well, I don't think you
Yeah.
can discuss special education without discussing
That's right.
behavior.
Right.
Yeah, that's gonna take a lot.
Well, I think that concludes this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. We'll see you the 23rd at 9 o'clock. And we'll all plan to stay
Thank you.
at lunch.
Thank
Yes.
Thanks for
you.
hosting, Fran.
Thank
you.
Thank you.